topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks again for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met yet and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant, organizational logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Elise Cortez and Associates help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by articulating their purpose and building inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant destination workplace. There, people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, grow into their fuller potential, and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on the company's mission. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Now, getting into today's program, we have Atif Rafiq. He's the author of Decision Sprint, the new way to innovate into the unknown and move from strategy to action. He's the founder and CEO of Ritual, a new software app, and an advisor to startups like SpaceX and Headspace. Throughout his career, Rafiq has shown passion for driving companies into the future. He has blazed trails in Silicon Valley and the Fortune 500 for over 25 years. After rising through digital native companies like Amazon, Yahoo, and AOL, he held C-suite roles at McDonald's, Volvo, and MGM Resorts. Rafiq was the first chief digital officer in the history of the Fortune 500, a pioneering role he held at McDonald's, and he was most recently president at MGM Resorts, a Fortune 500 company. Today, for the conversation, he joins us from Chicago. Atif, welcome to Working on Purpose. It's great to have you.
Elise, it's a pleasure to join you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Let's show off this beautiful thing you created, shall we? You know, I say this often because I usually feature authors, Atif, and I want you to know, as a mother and as a woman, what you did here is harder than bringing in a child to the world. You do not know that, right?
That's very kind of you. You know, I wouldn't know how to relate the two, but
don't quite know what to say to that. Just leave that alone. Well, it's wonderful to have you. I learned so much from my guests. I was just on with another guest in Australia that I had on a couple of years ago. I get to know my guests well and stay in touch. So I'm looking forward to learning about you. And so to start, I think we need to, before we even get into what you were doing at Silicon Valley, I think it makes sense to just start with, why did you pursue technology? Why that? Why not art? Why not architecture? Why not marketing? Why technology?
Well, I got started in the internet pretty early. It was 1996, and I did my first job at Goldman Sachs, and I didn't like it very much. So I I kind of took a calculated bet that technology, would be a space where I could be more creative. And I got started by writing a cold letter and mailing it to Steve Case, who was the founder of AOL. And he actually read the letter, gave it to someone else at the company, and I got a call. And so I was lucky enough to get my foot in the door in the internet when I really didn't have much experience, and learn a lot through, AOL, which was a very formative company of its time. But since then, I haven't looked back. So basically, I was able to find, strong connection and meaning with this thing called the internet, around all the possibilities, whether it be commerce or communication or, media. And I just saw that as like an unending sort of creative space. And obviously that's what it's turned out to be. And my start really came from this calculated bet of saying, okay, well, I'm early in my career. Let me at least try a thing, because then I'll know if I really, I won't have any regrets. And it turns out I didn't from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that this is quite an interesting and suitable place to take all of that intellect and creativity of yours, from what I could tell from your book. So kudos for figuring that out so early. So you have got just a remarkable resume. I mean, all the different companies you've worked for are amazing. So what I want to understand too is just how did you make the shift from working in Silicon Valley to the Fortune 500, and just a little bit about what have you brought? I mean, your book says this so beautifully. Now, for listeners and viewers who haven't heard this yet, this will be new for them. I read it, but let's hear it.
Sure. Well, I have metamorphosized a couple times in my career. I talked about the first one, which is basically like more of a, banking career into like, okay, let me do something that gives me meaning, where I understand the product and I like the product that we're providing to customers. And that was sort of, internet based companies. So that was the first metamorphosis. Then I thought I'd be doing that forever because I really enjoyed it. And I was a general manager leading a business unit at Amazon. But of course, the world keeps evolving. And so in 2013, about 10 years ago, every company, even companies that are not native, technology companies at the heart, began to see that their futures were impacted by technology. It could mean their customer experience, their business model, something was going to be disrupted, and they needed to rethink, the core of the company around technology and digitization. So at the time, the CEO of McDonald's, had a strong vision, didn't know exactly what it meant, but did know that technology would be very meaningful for the future of the company, and decided that he wanted to recruit somebody either out of Google or Amazon. And I had the opportunity to not only join McDonald's and become the first CDO in the history of the Fortune 500, but basically take this calculated bet where I could bring Silicon Valley thinking into a well-known global company that is very good at other things like execution and operations, and see if that formula, that mix of ingredients, could help the company grow in the next era and really set it up for the next 20 years in the areas I was responsible for. So I made a metamorphosis, a calculated bet that that would be a skill set where could be valued not only in McDonald's but even other industries. And that turned out to be the case where I went on to automotive and then resorts, and all kinds of companies in all industries obviously look at technology as a disruptive force. They want to rethink their core products and services around technology. So that's sort of my metamorphosis over 10 years. And now I'm working on my next 10-year metamorphosis.
Yeah, I want to applaud that, Atif. That one, it sounds like you've had really great gobs of fun, and in the process really truly move the needle. I know what you did at McDonald's, for example, and the Volvo work. It's just incredible, right? But I just really want to acknowledge and applaud that. I just, as someone who really believes in the world of work and that it shouldn't be a bad four-letter word, but an actual playground in which to realize your potential, I just really want to applaud what you have done for your own career and what you've done for the industry. Just really, it's so inspiring.
That's super kind of you. I really appreciate it. And, it means a lot to me because when you're a little bit of a pioneer, I don't want to label myself as a pioneer, but basically you take a risk. It may work out, it may not work out. A couple of things need to go right. You look like an all-star. A couple of things don't go your way. You look like, you made a bad move, right? So you don't really know what's going to happen, but you try and say, well, just a couple of things, if they line up, this could basically really be the next wave of how things are going. And so, that's how I look at decisions as well, is making kind of calculated bets, because there's no bulletproof, guarantee that something will work out. But if you can bet on yourself and you get the right support, from some colleagues or some other kind of key players around the table, great things can happen.
Mm-hmm. And you are living proof of that. So somewhere along the way, I've come to understand by reading your book and listening to some of the other things you've done, you started to figure out that the way that you were working with teams could be shared as a method. And that's, of course, what you call decision sprints. So help me understand, when did this occur for you? When did the aha hit you? That there was something about the way that you'd learned to work with teams that you could actually start teaching other people how to do in other organizations?
That's a wonderful question, because I didn't realize it till late in the game. I mean, I had been doing something that I didn't have a label for. which is really interesting to me, because you could be doing something for 10 years and it's producing results for the company. It's making, it's allowing teams to do better work and their best work. It's building your profile and your credentials in the marketplace. Like, all these good things are happening, but you haven't been able to step back and reflect on what is that thing, until maybe you get a break. And I had a break about 2 years ago where I got to look at that. So for a majority of my career, I would say I was always focused on the what versus the how. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you're at McDonald's and you talk about disruption, you're talking about the customer experience and how technology will make things more convenient. You're talking about introducing new ways of using McDonald's, new service models. That's the language that I was using when I was doing my job there. And that's really the what you're doing for the customer. But how you go about these innovations, how teams problem solve and figure out, how do you go from a raw idea to making something real and actually having it make impact, and even before you get there, having it see daylight because you got the organization to say yes and believe in it. That is the how. So there's the what and the how. And for a majority of my career, I thought, my job is to be, let's say, the main person having a vision for the what. What do we want to be when we grow up? What does good look like for Volvo? What is a great car, or a new way to get cars to customers or sell cars, for example? What does that look like? So it's all about the what. And in doing this work, about 10 years into transformation, I realized actually it's the how. It's independent of the category. It could be resorts, it could be burgers, it could be autonomous vehicles. But what's common across all this is we have a bright idea, but in the beginning we have a lot of unknowns, a lot of things to sort through, and we want to figure out how to get to the recommendations we're going to make, what the forks in the road are that we're going to take, how to get the organization to say, yeah, that makes sense, and how to unlock decision making so that we can get onto action and be very confident in the actions we're taking. That is a whole activity. And when I wrote my book, I started with giving that a label, and I call that upstream work, because upstream is basically the part where you're still trying to figure out, what is it that, what is our direction, and it comes before the downstream part of execution.
That's definitely one of the concepts in your book that I found really, really intriguing, Atif. It's just this notion of what you've situated there. And you actually say in your book, you say, perhaps my counterintuitive message, to experience speed and quality in decision making, organizations must start further upstream. Too often companies are cavalier or circular about how they handle unknowns. That's when it's time to make a decision, and they're paralyzed or they blunder into poor decisions. I think this is really a very interesting idea that you're putting forth, this counterintuitive message.
Yeah, it is a little bit counterintuitive, I think, because when people talk about decisions, they think about the decision point, which is, when what your choices are at the point in which you have to pick one, basically. And unfortunately, that is way too late in the game to actually put yourself in a position of confident decision making, because as anyone who's been in a meeting where decisions are being made will be familiar with meetings that don't go as well, because people start poking holes, pointing out blind spots, or being confused, like, how did you arrive at this conclusion here? Show me how you got there, right? Connecting the dots. And if you spend a 1-hour meeting and you spend 90% of it explaining how you got there, as opposed to the very high stakes decisions that need a yes or no, then that's probably the wrong mix. And the reason why that happens, that's a symptom of a problem, is that there's work further upstream which maybe wasn't done as well as it could have been. And so the counterintuitive message is to be at a point where you can take confident decisions and have, let me just say, drama-free decision points. You start further upstream when it's okay to have a lot of ambiguity, as long as you know how to make that uncertainty actionable. And the weeks and months teams spend trying to wrestle with that ambiguity, they do a really good job of reducing that ambiguity. And that's why I coined the term upstream work, and kind of illustrated through three phases and 13 workflows, basically.
We will dig more into that, but let's go ahead and grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Atif Rafiq. He's the author of Decision Sprint, the new way to innovate into the unknown and move from strategy to action. We've been talking a bit about his early career and where this book came from. After the break, we're going to dig more into these concepts. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, as I'm also dedicated to creating a world where people actually want to come to work and realize their potential and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness. And we do business that betters the world. I continue to write my own books. And so my latest one is called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. It came out in March 2023, and it's designed to help leaders understand what's happening in today's workforce and then offers 21 best practices to help equip them to provide that through their leadership and their culture. You can learn more about my books and how to find them at elisecortez.com. If you're just now joining us, my guest is Atif Rafiq. He's the founder and CEO of Ritual, a new software app, and the advisor to startups like SpaceX and Headspace, and the author of Decision Sprint, the new way to innovate into the unknown and move from strategy to action. Okay, so the next part I want to get to, which I think is really, really interesting about your book, and there were so many things, and you'll notice, I sent you some of the topics that I wanted to talk about. There's kind of a sprinkling here. And the reason I do that is because I like the conceptual stuff that you talk about, and I also like to be able to get into your model. But one of the things that I think is really interesting that you also treat is being able to deal with this idea of uncertainty and not getting stuck between the two extremes of either blank check autonomy or corporate micromanagement. So could you speak a little bit about that? Because this is where you get into, of course, your actual methodology. So if you could kind of paint the picture, of how organizations find themselves in this uncertainty and how your system of Decision Sprint actually treats that.
Well, in the book, I talk about the two common reactions to unknowns, which are either fear or not having enough fear and being too cavalier about it.
Right.
Trying to identify the sweet spot. But the first two things I talked about, I think people will recognize, because on the one hand, a reaction of fear causes companies to shrink their ambition before they actually really get going. So the idea sounds really interesting, but that would happen only if we focus on the known commodities. Like, what do we already know how to do well? And you would shrink your idea and your ambition to really, essentially make it, remove the risk. And the problem with that for everybody is that you still do a ton of work, but then what you ship turns out to not be a needle mover. Employees aren't happy because, when they tell their families what they're working on, what they worked on the last 2 years, it's kind of like a yawner, right? It's not meaningful. It didn't move the needle. And you don't feel good about that as an employee, right? Because you're still working, pretty intensely, over long periods. So we don't want to water down the ideas, but at the same time, we don't want to be cavalier about things and say, okay, we hope it works out, where basically you kind of give teams so much autonomy, but without asking the hard questions and poking the holes, where they wind up maybe producing a cool looking prototype, but then, it doesn't pass muster because some hard things haven't been thought about. Those hard things need to be thought about to make the idea stronger. And so the middle ground here is essentially starting with questions and saying it's okay to have space where we have a lot more unknowns than knowns, because that's what we're spending time on, is building, we're exploring these unknowns. We're doing an exploration where we're trying to make sense of these unknowns, get our head around them, gather a good fact base, maybe a good reasoning and critical thinking process to kind of put the puzzle together. And this exploration is going to give us a lot more clarity on what conclusions we should draw. This is harder than we thought, easier than we thought, this is doable, this is more expensive, less expensive than we thought. You can actually, you should draw the conclusions once you've actually explored the key unknowns or questions, is sort of what I start with. Now, why is this new? Is because often we don't allocate specific space to source questions, input, and make them actionable before we rush to judgment. A lot of times in companies, we rush to judgment before we actually do the exploration. And that's what I'm trying to offer as the wrong sequence, and there's a right sequence to improve it for everybody.
Okay, two things, Atif. First, it occurs to me to ask you, you're really serving up something here that's really near and dear to my heart, and when that comes around to potential. So I wonder if you have any sense at all of just how underutilized innovation and creativity occurs in most companies because of this, inability to do what you've learned how to do. Do you have any sense of that?
My sense is massively.
That's what I guess too, but
massively underutilized, because you see, and it's really a shame. And the next era of business, I think, will be very different, kind of because necessity is the mother of invention. And whether people came at it from a principled standpoint or because we just needed to help the companies grow, it's going to have to be quite different. But my perspective is that basically the way you help people realize their potential is you need to really unlock their intellect, because people do not feel valued if they know something or believe something and they can't get it on the table.
Right.
Or if they got it on the table and it didn't influence or get integrated into the company's thinking.
Right.
Now, that's not to say that every single person is right about their input, but that input we need to be able to have a way to surface it and then discern through it to say, oh, well, it was relevant or not relevant. And if it was relevant, then it gets integrated into the thinking. But the thing that makes us all feel sort of like intellectually not engaged is when we can't offer that, or it was relevant and we offered it, but it didn't impact the thinking of the company. This is a shame. And this is, good leaders recognize that, and they have a way of actually making sure that, you bring out the best in people, specifically around engaging their input. I think that good leaders are obsessed with input and looking for the right inputs.
Mm-hmm. And then the second thing that comes to my mind is, of course, I don't know if you heard my introduction to the program, but I really do believe in business as a force for good. It's just a force in the world, and of course, it's quite obvious to me that what you're doing, you have an opportunity to greatly expand the impact, the contribution of companies, which, those leaders, those founders that started that organization, the leaders in that organization, everybody that's part of it, to be able to recognize we're part of something great. We did something really great. We didn't just sort of move the needle a smidge and ship a little couple extra products. We created something grand. And I think that's really exciting, Atif, that you are providing this way of thinking and innovating today to companies.
At least we are totally on the same wavelength. I mean, my motivation is a big part of it is that we need to realize that work is a human experience, and that because it's essentially knowledge work in companies,
Mm-hmm.
that if you bring out the best in people's ability to contribute to the thought of the company and make that thought better, and then that leads to better results, that we feel better fulfilled as employees, and we are happier in our lives, able to give more to our families, to our communities, et cetera, et cetera. That's why business is a force for good, because helping someone basically, feel alive through,
Yes.
good thinking work, right? And thinking work that had an impact is a great way to make people more satisfied and more willing to kind of give of themselves. So I think it's a big part of what I'm trying to do is make sure that instead of getting a fraction out of people's potential, we actually get it as much as possible for everyone's benefit.
Hmm. I love it. So you got a lot of work to do, Atif. You got a lot of work. I hope you've got a lot of energy because you got a lot of work to do in the world. Uh, one of the things I also really enjoyed about your book is that I like how you situated your interviews with the leaders that you work with in these various companies. And the one I want to call out here, one of the conversations that you showcase is the one with the CEO of Volvo. And I thought it was absolutely delightful that you suggested to him that his title not be CEO, but clarity of thought. And I thought, and then that he did it. He took to it. So if you could speak a little bit to where that idea came from and why you feel so convicted on that.
Well, it was kind of a random interaction where, I needed to talk about certain initiatives we were working on. They were quite strategic, and what was top of mind for Håkon Samuelsson, who was Volvo's CEO, was changing the culture, and part of it, his idea was maybe removing titles from the
Yep.
executive team,
Mm-hmm.
and instead and I guess in your language, give each person a mission or a purpose statement, and that. So he wanted to start with himself. Said like, okay, if I don't call myself CEO president, what is my purpose? And I said, okay, well, you should ask various team members, but I can tell you from my Amazon experience, once heard Jeff Bezos say that his purpose as founder and CEO of the company was to promote clarity of thought. And that really stuck with me and struck me. And so I suggested to Håkon that maybe he consider that. And he liked it because that's pretty much what he was doing anyway with teams across this, mega company of 50,000 employees. Is he wasn't telling people what to do. I'm the CEO, this is what I want. He was always trying to understand how are they thinking about what they're responsible for and trying to make it a little bit better, fine-tuning their thinking, basically. And so I just gave a name to something that he was pretty much already doing. He liked it, so he basically if you went to the corporate website of Volvo, you'd see it didn't say he was CEO. It would say, something along the lines of this. It's like this tagline that he was the person who was promoting clarity of thought, or that was his purpose in the organization. And so, more kudos to him, I think, for for all the different aspects of that, where it made it clear what his style of leadership, what he was trying to do with his leadership style.
Mm-hmm. I like too, that was just beautiful how you brought that to light. I like too that you also situate in that section is, that you connected the idea that a CEO's highest contribution is to calibrate the thoughts of the organization, to straighten out any clumsiness from them, and to make that understanding, that make sure that understanding is driven into the teams. I think that is really crisp, and I don't think that I've seen that very often. This show's been on air for 8.5 years. I've had on a lot of people talking about leadership, etc., and that is a very nice, fresh concept.
Well, to me, I like it because it's visual, because I imagine like a clumsy string.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in the meeting about a topic, and there's four people, and my mindset is basically, what are we dealing with here? Like, is this a clumsy string with a lot of kinks? Is it a straight, very tightly, you know, um, laid out string? That actually influences what we have to accomplish in the 30 minutes we have together, for example, in a meeting. Whereas like, what are these kinks? How do we fix them? Because maybe the thought process is a little bit off. One of the assumptions isn't really a strong assumption, so we need to redirect and to pivot the thinking. But in order to get the thinking of the group on the table, it's not easy, right? Actually, you burn a lot of calories in your brain. You need to have plenty of protein that morning, maybe a couple hard-boiled eggs, because to get an understanding of what the team is actually thinking is really critical. When you only have 30 minutes with them, you're the leader, and you're going to move on to 5 other things, because that is your shot to really get everyone in this mind meld where they're thinking clearly enough about it. And this is so critical. The upside is if you do it well, they go off, they do 10 other meetings about the thing that you're not involved with, and they're cascading all the right understanding and information, activating the organization in a great way. And then, if you do that repeatedly with this team, 3 months from now, the initiative has a lot of momentum and you look great. And all you did was, really engage in the right way, in a few interactions. So there's a lot of upside as a leader in thinking about clarity of thought as part of what you need to contribute in your work leading teams.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we get to this next part that I thought was really, really critically important. I see this all the time in the work that I'm doing when I come into organizations, and you talk a lot about how cold starts happen where you see the team being passive about fact finding and continuing to dig. They're waiting for someone to tell them to do something. And you talked about this at one of your particular places that you were landing. But what was interesting is, you say the prior regimes didn't have the expectation, and people were not accustomed to this idea of fact finding and continuing to dig. But then things began to change once the team began to see that these stand-up meetings that you were doing were not a call to the principal's office, but instead a way to solve a puzzle together. I think if we could get more organizations to do just that right there, Atif, we could really change the output of organizations, the connection, the experience of what they're doing. If you can get people to be able to feel safe, to be able to do that, you've already, I think, so much elevated your game.
100%. I know this is right in your wheelhouse around psychological safety.
Yes.
It's really hard for leaders, because leaders know that, results matter a lot. So then the emotional component of leadership is, fear, are we not going to get there? And then how do I make myself clear that, I'm being demanding and we need to get there, right? But now you're going to get people to shut down some parts of their brain. I mean, I'm not a brain expert, but I know that, there's parts where the thinking brain versus the kind of just the doing brain, right? And you want to activate enough of the thinking brain, kind of your Daniel Kahneman sort of system 2 thinking, if you will. And so you have to be, pretty careful, and you have to keep it neutral. It's like, okay. And that's why in the book, I talk about, the right part of an initiative or phase of initiative where you want to really get the questions and the ambiguity out on the table. And it's okay to do that because that's the whole purpose of that step in the process, if that makes sense. Like, there's no answers expected. Not only are there no answers expected, I don't even expect you to have a recommendation or be able to draw conclusions. I just expect you to be able to tell me all the main things that we need to get our head around. And that's step 1 of making, unknowns actionable, is knowing what they are and feeling good about that list that the team can do detective work on. So if we create we can create psychological safety by looking at workflow where there is a step in the process where the ambiguity is what we're actually trying to gather.
I really appreciate that. And so making the exploration process not just safe, but fun and dynamic, and the better the questions, the better we are. So I just really want to celebrate that and call that out. And on that note, let's let our listeners and viewers think about that while we take our next break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Atif Rafiq, the author of Decision Sprint, the new way to innovate into the unknown and move from strategy to action. We'll continue the conversation after the break. Stay with us.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I mentioned in the last break, my latest book, The Great Revitalization, is out. And this is really something for organizations to be able to evaluate what they're doing around their culture and their leadership. So to augment that, I have on my website for you an organizational assessment for you to learn the extent to which your company's leadership and culture actually meet the standards of today's workforce. You can go to elisecortez.com and then go to How We Help tab and find it there. If you're just now joining us, my guest is Atif Rafiq, the founder and CEO of Ritual, a new software app, and he's an advisor to startups like SpaceX and Headspace, and the author of Decision Sprint, the new way to innovate into the unknown and move from strategy to action. So for this next bit here, I couldn't resist. I have to have you as someone who has such a beautiful, innovative, creative mind. I really loved when you wrote in the book, you say, for a company to endure, it needs to deliver wow and OMG. Not so what. So we need a way to overcome or outsmart this potential pitfall in organizations. And I think this is really important to talk about. So I wonder how many organizations are going for wow or oh my God.
Well, I can tell you is that people are very busy in pretty much every organization, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the output of that is going to be OMG or wow. And OMG and wow are actually really, really hard. And sometimes, there is some OMG potential at the beginning when the idea is compelling and kind of their eyes, the light bulbs go off, right? And I think a lot of people experience that, but it's getting some staying power in that which is, part of why I offer this method of having a workflow where you don't water things down. And at the same time, you're pretty purposeful and you're not also blind to real question marks. So the main idea is that you surface the right questions, you're neutral about it. A lot of questions does not mean that you should be shy or run from the idea. Making those questions actionable so that you suspend judgment and come to conclusions when you're standing on a high quality fact base or thinking through all the right things, enough of the right things, then you're in a position. That's how you preserve the OMG, because basically people are very creative in companies. They are problem solvers. And if you give them the time and space to identify the right things, get to the bottom of them, they may very well find out how to make things work in reality. That is real OMG potential, because then everyone starts being confident that it's not just a bright idea, but that we can actually pull it off. And that's how you build a machine around OMG. Now, the good news is, I know it sounds hard, but you run water through the pipes once or twice, people start believing there's a method to the madness. It's not just, one blip where there was a great creative burst in the company. No, it's actually a repeatable thing. We can make this systematic, and making a systematic way of solving meaningful problems, of innovating new ideas, that is what will make an enduring company. So I'm passionate about helping, companies get there through a system.
Mm-hmm. Which I really, really applaud, really appreciate that. I am a systems thinker as well. And being able to adopt your system and put it into, as you say, any category, right? It works anywhere, is really incredibly exciting. So, one thing we didn't talk about, Atif, is you said that you meet something about the 2 year ago mark here. What happened 2 years ago that would situate you on this different track?
Well, I stepped off the corporate treadmill, so to speak. I was in a pretty high level role at a Fortune 300 at the time at MGM Resorts in the president role. And I thought to myself, what is what is my highest purpose? And my conclusion was, as opposed to helping one company at a time, I wanted to build a system, both a system like in general as a set of methods, but also through technology and software, where I could help any company, in fact, any team in any company. And therefore I made a break and I'm on my latest Metamorphosis as of 2 years ago, which is essentially an entrepreneurial track of getting my new company, Ritual, off the ground. It's a software app, and then some of the work that's related around the book, Decision Sprint, and other ways in which I can bring and teach, the idea of, the system or management operating system for companies that I think is fit for purpose as we look at the next era of business. So that's the pivot that I made.
I really applaud that. I've stepped in that track, not quite like you are, but I've stepped on that track. I know what that feels like. Now we have to talk about what's Ritual. What's the app?
So Ritual is an app that is designed for teams. It enables teams to go from, a raw idea or kind of a high level objective through the process of coming up with building an exploration, running an exploration, using explorations to come up with recommendations, and even preparing the content that they might use for meetings, decision meetings, for examples, by producing content like FAQs or a strategic narrative. But it basically breaks everything down into a workflow, software workflows, and it's designed for a team. So that a team can go into a meeting, let's say with sponsors, and they can sort of knock their socks off and say, wow, like your work is, thoughtful. You've thought of all the right questions. We understand how you got to your recommendations. So really streamlining the process of getting to buy-in and yes for, for your bright ideas. That's what the software app is designed for.
Brilliant. Okay. Makes complete sense. Okay, now we would be remiss. You started to hint about this before, and I do want to ask if you would treat it, because I know your book is related to the future of knowledge work, and so it'd be interesting if you could make the connection between your ideas and knowledge work.
Well, I think knowledge work is a spectrum, and basically what you've seen with software and a lot of the conversation around AI is more, I would say, on the on the execution side of knowledge work, right? It's like repeatable things you can document, so on and so forth. And so we will teach the AI, and then it sort of like takes over, so to speak, But I'm working on the end of knowledge work where, humans and machines need to work together. And I see that happening forever. I don't see.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, I don't see AI taking over the work of innovation or the most meaningful problem solving in a company. But I do see AI helping increase the speed of that and making it go a lot better as well. So I see the velocity of problem solving and innovation going much faster and better when humans and AI kind of come together on the upstream part of things, which is things like coming up with the right questions. And so, for example, if you look at Gen AI specifically, if we were a team and we had a problem statement, that we're trying to get our head around, and we came up with, 5 or 7 important questions that we need to look into, AI can suggest similar questions or questions that might be blind spots from our current list and help us round that out. That's how humans and AI can work together. Or let's say you have a question list, you begin to take a crack at answering them. AI can point out things in your answers like, hey, this is a good point, but you need evidence for it, so go get some data, for example. Or, hey, your reasoning on this is a little bit weaker, you need to elaborate more. That Gen AI can be good at those type of things to basically complement the work that we do at a team level. And the result of that is speeding up the quality and the speed of innovation.
I'm already finding that just in my own work as well, Atif, playing with that to be able to kind of test out and tease out how can I improve what I put forth here, and getting some of that feedback from Gen AI. So I think that's just absolutely beautiful. So you've just affirmed what I'm doing, so thank you for that. So we have to talk a little bit more about the management piece here, because that's definitely my jam, and we're getting close to time here. But you do say in your book, you say Peter Drucker, who of course is considered a father of modern management theory, would roll over in his grave. You say that why are the ideas in your book considered consequential to the field of management, and how are the work of, so in other words, how is your work consequential to what he's put forth, and why would he roll over in his grave?
Well, first, I used to read Peter Drucker in college, so that's like my
I
hero,
remember him too. Yep.
and so I've written so many books, and it's pretty amazing. But the era in which Peter Drucker was writing is entirely different because
Right.
that was an environment where things were stable, and because
Predictable.
yeah, and predictable, and because of that, you could have situations in companies where a few people kind of wrestle with ambiguity, think things through, and then the rest of the company just executes. So you have a few people kind of
Mm,
figuring things out, and the rest making sure that they keep their promises and are clear on their objectives and accountable for their results. And that defined basically business for a long time, like 50 years, right? But that's, then we evolve. Now it's actually the inverse of that. Is It's not a few people, it's pretty much 95% of people need to contribute towards figuring things out, and just a few people are execution only, follow this SOP, operating procedure, well documented thing. We all know that AI is nibbling up on that work.
right.
So the whole paradigm is upside down. And so if you design knowledge work for those conditions, you get something very different where basically having people understand how to embrace ambiguity, not be frightened by it, kind of make it actionable, and then put that into how to connect it into decision making at some point and in the right way becomes really essential to have across the company, cascade and scale across the company. So, it really is down to the fact that the volatility, the velocity, the amount of ambiguity on pretty much everything the company is working on, those are the conditions that define the context of businesses today. So I think, Peter Drucker would come up with a different system, but he's not around. So the rest of us have to figure out what that looks like.
Well, you just took the baton, my friend. So you're doing great. Keep on running down the track. So we've done it. We've come to the end of the show already. It happened so fast. So this program is listened to by people around the world. And what we really are up to here is we're trying to create workplaces where people actually want to come to work. They do their best because they want to. They're led by inspirational leaders, and we do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave them with?
I would like to leave people with the fact that, work is a human experience, and bringing out the best in people is the same thing as putting the company in the best position to grow and endure. They are literally the same thing. So if you want to look at the health of a company, we have to look at whether people feel that the workplace is sustainable for them, right? And if they're able to bring out their best work. To me, if you can put your finger on those two things, you're getting to, then you're going to put your finger. It's a great indicator of whether that company is going to continue to put up the results and the growth.
Mm-hmm. Atif, thank you so much for being on Working on Purpose. It's always delightful. I get to meet people like you who I wouldn't otherwise meet because of this program. I'm very happy to cross paths. You are delightful, and your work is very exciting.
Well, I really appreciate your support, and your helping me spread these ideas. It's been a real pleasure to join you, Elise.
Thank you. Great to know you. Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about Atif Rafiq, his book Decision Sprint, or his work, the best place to start would just be decisionsprint.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Dr. Robert Lingell talking about his new book, A Place for Tea, Giving Voice to the Tortoise in Our Harebrained World, which among many other things discusses the promise of developing the capacity for divergent thinking to address today's business challenges and the criticality of embracing slower speed, empathy, and ambiguity to do so. Next week, we'll be on air with Grant Gregoire talking about the work he does, unleashing entrepreneurial spirit for good and anchored in stakeholder capitalism principles. See you there. And remember, work is an essential part of our lives, ultimately the way we spend our lives, and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune in to Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires and passion performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.